On April 21st, 2025, the 266th Pope, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, according to those with him at his final moments, died peacefully and with minimal suffering. Following Pope Benedict's resignation in 2013, Pope Francis was elected as his successor and was a historic pick in a lot of ways, one that a lot of people didn't see coming. He was the first ever Jesuit Pope, the first Pope from the broader Americas, and specifically the first Pope from South America and the global South in general. On a personal note, I was born, baptized, and confirmed as a Roman Catholic growing up, so even if I'm not as devout now as I was in my tween years, Pope Francis was the Pope I knew for most of my life while I was still figuring out all this liking men stuff. And at a time where some aspects of the church that I experienced directly were anti-LGBT or dogmatic about belief, while Francis didn't start officiating gay marriages or anything, he was by leagues more inclusive to queer folk almost immediately after getting into office. He said just a few months after assuming the role, "Who am I to judge?" in reference to queer folk. And though he upheld the Catholic stance of marriage as between a man and a woman, he did condemn laws that criminalized gay behavior. He met with trans folk and highlighted the importance of making the church welcoming to queer folk, that they very much could be Catholic and a part of the faith as they were. And you can definitely make fair criticisms of his record on this issue. It wouldn't make sense not to. There were his comments on gender ideology, which he said was like a threat, but a lot of that came down to a translation issue from my experience. A lot of that came down to a pretty bad translation error, from my understanding. But to me, growing up, his position on these issues relative to what I was used to from some Catholic peers was meaningful. Nina, please play the Joe Biden gay marriage clip.
Senator, do you support gay marriage?
No.
Hi again, guys, and sorry to start this video off heavy, and it's not gonna stop for a little bit, but we'll get there, because there are other issues of note that Pope Francis was criticized for, namely his relationship with his home country of Argentina. While being the first South American Pope was huge for Catholics on the continent, with Francis making visits to a lot of South American nations, there was a very notable exception of his home country of Argentina. During his 12 years as the Pope, he never visited his home country. Some speculate this was in an effort to avoid being dragged into local politics. One Sebastian Morales said he didn't want any president to wrap themselves in his cloak to say, "I'm the one who brought the Pope here." I remember Javier Milei, Argentina's current president, called Francis an imbecile and a communist turd, which I thought was funny, especially when he had to walk it back and now he's going to the Pope's funeral to pay respects. But a big point of contention was Francis's time in the Argentine Dirty War, a period in the 70s to the early 80s where a military junta controlled Argentina, where the state ran a brutal military campaign hunting down political enemies, namely anybody considered as having ties to socialism, with death squads and all sorts of heinous shit. Pope Francis got allegations that in regards to the military junta kidnapping two Jesuit priests, Orlando Iorio and Franz Jalix, he was accused of failing to stand up to the junta and not having done enough to protect the priests from the kidnapping and the brutal torture they faced at the hands of the Argentinian state of the time. The two priests have expressed some seemingly differing views of the Pope's culpability in their kidnapping or having done enough to prevent it. Francis himself has claimed on one occasion that he worked to help free the priests behind the scenes and was no fan of the regime, and multiple folk of note have said that while he may not have spoken out in defense of the priests to help prevent their capture, that he wasn't in any way a collaborator with the dictatorship. He was never formally charged for these allegations, and I'm giving a very quick overview here as the nuance runs deep. This is a topic that, if you're interested in, I'd recommend doing your own reading on, because I'm not covering even close to the full breadth of the issue here. In either way, it still exists within the totality of his life. He did good shit, he did bad shit, and now that he's gone, the question is, what did they add up to him leaving behind? And besides, if you only learned one thing about Pope Francis from this video that you commit to memory, I want it to be that MatPat, yes, that Matthew Patrick, the very same from Game Theory, got to meet Pope Francis. This was back in the mid-2010s, and if you didn't know, it's customary to bring a gift when meeting the Pope, and MatPat decided instead of repping America, he was going to rep an even more oppressed minority around the globe, gamers. So what exactly did he gift the Pope?
Each and every one of us is a complicated collection of likes, dislikes, fears, experiences, and beliefs. It's hard to boil down to the core what makes you, you. So instead, we define ourselves not by what we are, but what we are not. We are not them. We draw a clear, black and white line. This is who I am, and I would never be one of those sorts of people. And that is the first reason I gave the Pope a Steam code for Undertale.
It was a fucking Steam code, too. Nothing quite as classic as a long contextual explanation from a game theory episode, and ironically, taking it out of context because what MatPat is trying to tie it into is so unexpected if you aren't told first. That said, on some level, I understand the idea of giving the Pope a game like Undertale with its overarching themes. Trying to tell a game that has a story as universal as Undertale's can be representative of an ideal, even if we don't, like, actually reach it. And even if it didn't do shit, because the Pope has most certainly never played it in any capacity to learn what the message of the game is. And if Matthew's messaging on the topic is, like, kind of funny to look at, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't rewatch the full explanation. Some people were going, well, if it was gonna be a game he gifted to the Pope, it should have been like Tetris or something more seminal. Personally, I would have given him the Darkness too, but I think there's something to be said about this coming from MatPat specifically, like he's the one who has to give it to the Pope, so that gift being from his brain directly has some merit to it. And let's be honest, he was just playing the long game. He beat all of us by the end of it, because thanks to Matthew Patrick, Pope Francis was not only the first Pope to be exposed to Undertale, but he was the first Pope to be exposed to Undertale twice. Megalovania somehow made it into an orchestral performance that Francis was watching a few years back. Something 2 nickels. Also, would this be a bad time to mention that I have a U2's figure? This little guy exists because y'all supported the plush so much, and I tried to pour my whole pussy into this thing. There are a lot of details on the vinyl figure and the packaging that I think y'all are gonna enjoy, and you can really do whatever you want with it when you get your hands on me. Put him on a shelf, have him deal drugs, run the front desk for your business. He even fits inside a jar incredibly well if you're so inclined. The thing is, he's only available for the next 4 weeks. I'm sorry I said 2 last video, that was an accident. 4 weeks. On May 20th, this little guy is gone forever, so if you are raring to get your hands on one, he is available for a limited time only at the first link in the description. Now, the timing of the Pope's death couldn't have been more absurd in multiple ways. For one, Pope Francis decided to keel over the day after not just Easter, but also 420. For reference, the last time Easter was on National Weed Day was over a decade ago in 2014, and the next time it'll be on National Weed Day is 2087. That's a while from now. Crazy coincidence, or just crazy? On top of that, the movie Conclave, a film from last year about the succession and election of the next Pope, came to Amazon Prime streaming the day after Pope Francis passed away, creating one of the craziest guerrilla marketing campaigns I've seen since the Charlie Charlie challenge and people running away butt-ass naked in fear because pencils were spinning to a light breeze. This is also like the second time Trisha Paytas has been pregnant with a child when a world leader dies. The last time was when Queen Elizabeth got nay-nayed into the ether at the same day that Trisha Paytas was giving birth. This was back in 2022. It doesn't line up as cleanly this time with the Pope dying while she was still like a few months away, but I imagine he likes to take his time, so he decided to give Trisha a few months to adjust to the news that he'd be getting reincarnated as her child. What's even weirder though is in another collective pattern with the same pair of world leaders as Trisha Paytas' pregnancy, Queen Elizabeth and the Pope both died around the time a Tumblr sexy man poll was ongoing or concluding. The Queen died in September 22, just a week before the poll ended, and Pope Francis died on the exact day that the Tumblr Sexy Man poll of 2025 ended. Less strongly correlated, but a more worrying pattern if truly connected, that Francis is the second Pope to die shortly after the conclusion of a Sexy Man poll. Pope Benedict, Francis's predecessor, died just the December after the poll that killed Queen Elizabeth. But perhaps the most widely publicized and suspicious coincidence was regarding friend of the channel, one JD Vance. On Weed Easter, Vance met with Pope Francis in order to exchange Easter greetings, and then Francis died of cringe immediately after. To many, this was just another note in the pattern of the literal destruction Vance seems to leave in his wake wherever he goes. A few weeks ago, the Ohio State football team won the national championship and went to make a customary visit to the White House in the wake of it to celebrate. Vance was, for some reason, entrusted to hold the championship trophy, and the thing immediately collapsed at his touch. I'm just saying, I don't think it's a coincidence that the trophy looks kinda like the Pope's tall hat. He was actively signaling to us what he planned on doing. Fast forwarding to more recent times, like 2 days ago, just the day after the Pope's death, Vance headed out to India and had a meeting with Prime Minister Modi over there. And what do you know? A devastating attack occurs in India that I am not equipped to discuss the nuances of. It makes the broken football statue feel kind of quaint, huh? That said, killing the Pope was enough for a lot of people to go, holy shit, JD Vance is the Antichrist. As funny as the notion is, I just don't buy it. The Antichrist is supposed to be a charismatic leader, which takes Vance out of the running like by default. And I just don't even think he is close to the raw spiritual output required to kill a Pope off pure vibes. I think when Pope Francis met the guy, he just made an executive decision to just piece the fuck out after. There's a big difference between getting murdered and choosing that you lived a long and fulfilling life at the age of 88. God, he was just a kid. Suspicious coincidences aside, with the seat empty, the role of Pope is now open, and there's a lot of discussion of who's most likely to take up the mantle next. List of names and their leanings have been put forward, and whoever ends up getting picked we will be hearing about a lot for like the next decade, so it's probably important to discuss what the process even is. Who's eligible, what's the timeline, who gets to choose, could you slow down with all the fucking questions I was about to explain? So usually, a Pope is chosen from the cardinals, but technically all it takes to be eligible is being a baptized Catholic male, and at least on paper, get this, I check all of these boxes, baby. Yep, let the cheers roll in. It's time to celebrate, guys. I am announcing my candidacy for the Pope. Now, there's this tiny issue that the last time a non-cardinal was appointed as Pope, being almost a millennia ago, but it's still technically possible for me to get the job. Right now is objectively the closest I've ever been to becoming the Pope. After a Pope dies, though, there are 9 days of mourning, and the election itself starts from 15 to 20 days after the Pope's death to elect a new one through a process called the conclave. Remember that movie I mentioned earlier called Conclave? Yeah, guess what it was about? That's right, the conclave. To vote in the conclave, you have to be a cardinal under the age of 80. An age limit on voting. What a novel idea. All eligible cardinals are called to Rome to take part in the conclave. There are 252 total cardinals right now, but only 135 are eligible to vote on the next pope. And 2/3 of those cardinals have to agree for a pope to be selected. And notably, Pope Francis has elevated 108 of those eligible 135 cardinals to the position they're in now. A lot of them coming from the global south and other underrepresented areas in the Catholic Church as an institution. This gave a lot of people the impression that Francis had packed the courts, so to speak, in a way where whoever was elected pope next was likely to be someone with similar values to his own and would in some way or form continue his work. But it's just not that simple. Every cardinal is their own very old and wise person with strong opinions that they have likely become entrenched in their old age. And you can't predict that they'll vote in line with Francis's values just because he appointed them. They have a whole lot of more history before that happened. That's having said nothing about how even if a cardinal is too old to vote, they are still allowed in the conversation. They get to talk during the thing and be part of the reasoning for whatever these guys choose, and they have the potential to sway people's votes, influencing the decision. I don't know how often it happens now, but throughout history, that meant even sometimes through dirty means, like blackmail is not unheard of in this process. Religious leaders or not, all the cardinals are human with their own vices, and there's probably certain parts of their lives that you just don't want to see getting blasted out there. But back to the conclave process, when everyone gets gathered, they run votes until they have a decision, where at the end of each voting session, a different color smoke is lit into the air to signify if a pope has been chosen. Black smoke means that no conclusion was reached, so voting will continue, and white smoke is cause for celebration, as it means the next pope has been chosen. The votes usually go like this, where on the first night where everybody has gathered for the conclave, they only hold one vote, and that's primarily seen as a way to gauge where everybody who's participating in this conclave is currently at with their opinions and priorities. And it's in the following days where all the action goes down. The conclave will vote up to 4 times a day, twice in the morning and twice in the afternoon, and they repeat that process until they have the 2/3 majority they need to agree on who the next pope is. After this, the pope will choose a name to take on as the pope and give their first speech as the pope on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. From that point on, it's just history being written in front of your eyes, and the only thing left to do is see what comes next. On that note, it's hard to say which way the Catholic Church as an institution will be going in the near future. Pope Francis may very well have been the pope who oversees a turning point in the church's thinking to something more progressive, or he could just be like a glitch, an anomaly on the timeline. An ultra-traditionalist may get chosen as his successor, and they could swing the church hard back in the other direction. Like I said, an array of names have been put forth as likely candidates, and one that stood out to me was His Eminence Louis Antonio Tagle. He's the former Archbishop of Manila, and he's seen as very in line with the progressive wing of the church. The Francis of Asia, he's called sometimes. I don't know much about the specifics of his life. He mostly stood out to me because I was like, Philippines mentioned, shout out my guys, where he was just one of a bunch of names I saw get put forth. And it's very possible that none of those names are the one that ends up getting chosen. At the end of the day, I'm more mad that even though sports betting has been thoroughly legalized in the United States, to the point where Americans are down an estimated $245 billion since the Supreme Court made sports betting a choice up to the states, that even after all that, they're telling me, but it's still illegal to vote on who the next pope's gonna be? That is such bullshit, man. That would have been the funniest way possible to go into crippling gambling debt. We're all headed that way anyway, so you might as well let me make it a funny story along the way. Please, I just want to gamble on stupid shit. Oh, that's all I got. Just let me know if you guys think I missed anything, got anything wrong, or just have general thoughts on the subject. I would genuinely be interested to hear, especially from Catholics in the audience who might have had like a similar upbringing to me. Remember, my YouTube is out for a limited time. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed and subscribe with notifications on. Anyways, this has been Kwite, and I'll see y'all next time.